Have you ever put off starting a project because you just couldn't get past the start? Or have you tossed and turned at night stressing about a big presentation the next day? These are telltale signs you might be a perfectionist, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can be if it fills you with fear and anxiety. Unchecked and unbalanced perfectionism can take away the good in your life. Perfectionism can interfere with your personal goals, relationships, mental and physical health, and your overall well-being and sense of fulfillment. But you can reshape the thinking and rebuild your relationship with perfectionism. My name is Dr. Nicole Tatro. I'm a compassionate neuroscientist, author of Insight into a Bright Mind, and a meditation teacher. I'm passionate about helping people, and I truly believe the lessons of neuroscience and positive psychology can help you live your best life. In this short course, I want to help you overcome perfectionism with compassion and insight. I'll share methods for how to identify and minimize unhealthy aspects of perfectionism. I'll model how to nurture the positive aspects of healthy striving, and I'll also give you strategies for breaking up the perfection paralysis cycle in your life. The truth is, perfectionism is a spectrum. You have more control than you think. I want to help empower you to take control of the situation and avoid some common missteps. Identifying your unhealthy perfectionism and tendencies will liberate you. So if you're ready to tackle your relationship with perfectionism, let's go. Who doesn't want things to be perfect? Human nature and culture are obsessed with achieving perfection ideals. Think about it for a moment. In sports, medicine, branding, academia, dance, technology, journalism, in almost every field and every culture sets standards for perfectionistic outcomes. We are taught from an early age to strive for an A, 100%. Often your self-worth can get wrapped up in this unrealistic ideal. In psychology, perfectionism is frequently described as a character trait where an individual has the desire to strive for perfection, to be without flaw, and experiences high level of self-criticism and is extremely concerned with others' evaluations. So I want you to start to develop an awareness of ordinary aspects of perfectionism and how it shows up and how it complicates your daily life. In my early years documenting my experiments in the laboratory, I wrote my notes in a Sharpie marker only. One day, I knocked over a jar of 70% alcohol onto my lab notebook, and the sea of blue bled across the pages. Months of documenting experiments wiped out in seconds. I learned then that permanent marker isn't so permanent. In the blink of an eye, alcohol solution erased my progress. My efforts, my knowledge were suddenly undocumented. When I made mistakes like this, silly, stupid mistakes, I made up a story filled in my mind with thoughts that I was a failure and how stupid I was. I judged and criticized myself, though I was learning new things. My lab brain was growing, testing, and hypothesizing. Has something like this ever happened to you? Reflect for a moment and inquire where perfectionism may show up in your daily life. Where do you strive for perfectionism? At home, work, or even in your thoughts from moment to moment? In graduate school, I had a number of perfectionistic tendencies that interfered with my productivity and self-esteem. But over time, like the time I spilled alcohol in my lab notebook, I learned that spilling is a part of life. Soggy lab notes happen. Humans make mistakes. When I made a mistake, I had a distorted view of myself, and I set myself up with the idea that I should not make mistakes. I do fail, and I will fail in the future, and so will you. It's a part of life. If you want to overcome perfectionism, you need to stop feeding yourself impossible stories and minimizing what you learned and are learning from being imperfect. That day in the lab, I learned that nothing is permanent and mistakes happen. And I also learned not to write my notes in Sharpie. I learned a mistake doesn't mean a failure, there's always another way. And now I write everything in pencil. I want you to start strengthening your self-awareness muscle. Think about a time when a mistake allowed you to develop something new. What ideas and patterns changed for you? Did you improve from this knowledge? I encourage you to reflect and note in your daily life where perfectionism begins and offer yourself opportunities to imagine being okay if you have mistakes. As Wolfgang Ribes said, no one is perfect. That's why pencils have erasers. Are you a perfectionist? A hallmark of perfectionism is setting yourself up to achieve flawless standards. Does this sound like you? Are there things in your life related to work that set you in a perfectionistic loophole, like presenting or speaking up in meetings, or the standards to keep a daily appearance impeccable interfering with your motivation and productivity? More often than not, you're habitual in your nature, and you may not even know that you're routinely experiencing perfectionism. If you don't know your triggers, you may not even notice if you're falling into a trap of perfectionism. It's time for you to identify and unpack the triggers that are causing perfectionistic tunnel vision. Here's a method for identifying your ordinary traps and behaviors in your daily life. According to a longitudinal study conducted by Thomas Kern and Andrew Hill, perfectionism is on the rise in American and UK students, and it's causing havoc in their life. Kern and Hill conducted a study over 27 years with more than 40,000 participants and reported that the overall perfectionism is on the rise over the past 3 decades by 33%. They found a jump in the perfectionism in college students in 3 major areas, including self-oriented perfectionism, socially prescribed perfectionism, and other-oriented perfectionism. Often, perfectionism can cause strained work and family relationships where impeccable standards take over and everybody is living on pins and needles because perfectionistic standards. Do you experience challenges with relationships related to perfectionism? Are there struggles at home where perfectionism is running your life? Are you under a rule of a perfectionistic boss or family member? Think about what role societal perfectionism is playing in your life. The rise in perfectionism also accompanies a number of mental health conditions like anxiety and depression. Have you ever lost sleep over perfectionistic ideals you set up for yourself? Like what to wear? What are you going to say? Thinking and feeling it must be perfect, and if there's anything less, that you're a failure? Take a moment and inquire how perfectionism shows up in your mental health and daily relationships. Can you pinpoint in the cycle where perfectionism is coming from? Is it within you? Are there social pressures, family pressures, or are you creating perfectionistic pressures? If so, can you map all the people that are involved in the web of perfectionism? This map will help you navigate your perfectionism and the relationships that are ruled by it. Perhaps illuminating the blocks that perfectionism is causing can help you manage it. Humans make mistakes. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is fixed in space and time. Mistakes happen. Mistakes are how we process for you to grow and develop further. So I want you to recognize the importance of learning through your mistakes. You can bring more compassion and support to yourself and others throughout the learning process. First, I want you to remember the phrase, perception is reality. Your thoughts can shape your reality. Begin to reshape your stories and ideas to be more accepting of imperfection. You are a growing being, shaping your very own reality. You can fill up your mind with perfectionistic standards that take away the good in your life, or you can decide to accept imperfections. One of the greatest challenges a perfectionist struggles with is failure to measure up to ideal standards and fear of making mistakes. Mistakes are a normal part of life and make us better human beings for it. Can you find areas where you can allow for mistakes and allow things to be imperfect? I once had a friend tell me that her entire life she felt she had to be perfect. On her first day at the office, her name placard outside of her office door was slightly crooked. Her name was not perfectly aligned. Normally, she would have called maintenance to make sure her name placard was perfectly straight. But what she realized is that she didn't want it to change because it was a daily reminder when she walked into her office that things aren't perfect. Specifically, being perfect was not going to rule her life. And it was a small reminder to allow for mistakes into daily life and learn in each and every moment. Can you find a daily reminder that can help you recognize letting go of being perfect? Is there a mistake that happened that actually moves you towards your goals? In the words of Anne Lamott, clutter and mess show us that life is being lived. Perfectionism is a mean, frozen form of idealism, while messes are the artist's true friends. What people somehow forgot to mention when we were children is that we need to make messes in order to find out who and why we are here. I encourage you to reflect and note in your daily life where perfectionism begins and offer yourself opportunities to imagine being okay if there are mistakes, and even provide yourself with daily reminders of imperfection and impermanence to more freely think and accept mistakes. Do you struggle with change? Do you experience challenges with thinking flexibly? Do you want to know how to introduce more flexibility in your daily life? A key piece is allowing yourself to experience impermanence. Nothing is permanent. And when you adjust your mindset to impermanence, you come into a greater presence of your reality. For example, have you ever washed your car and it's glistening clean? And then rolled down your window and bam, there are window streaks? That's happened to me. And it's a fresh reminder, nothing is permanent. So welcome yourself into the reality of impermanence and go with the process of change. I want you to take a pause with me for a moment. Now gently close your eyes to remove any visual stimulus. Now focus your attention on your thoughts. You may be thinking, what does this have to do with perfectionism? I have to get back to work, or what am I going to make for lunch or dinner? Take a moment here and notice the flow of thoughts and how they move like water in a river. Thoughts are continuous. They come and go in waves. Picture your thoughts like waves, part of the human experience. Remind yourself, I'm caught in a current of thoughts, and this is a human experience. Or I'm a human experiencing waves of thoughts. You don't have to follow or go down the rabbit hole of thoughts. You can allow them to flow as easily as they come in and out, open to impermanence. Now, gently blink your eyes open. Taking a moment to notice your thoughts can be the difference of you getting trapped in a perfectionistic loophole or releasing the thoughts of perfectionism and noticing the relationship of the thoughts being impermanent. One way to help you with your perfectionistic tendencies can be opening to the fact that things are absolutely impermanent. So find the importance of impermanence, especially as it relates to releasing the feeling that you must be perfect. This week, I encourage you to spend 5 minutes a day in silence and track your thoughts. Watch your mind and see how it goes from one thing to the next and so on and so forth. Follow your mind and watch the flow of thoughts and how they are impermanent. Allow the natural waves of life to ebb and flow, messy, unpredictable, and perfectly imperfect. I remember in grade school getting an exam back and missing points. I didn't get a perfect score. I felt horrible about myself, and I focused on the questions I missed rather than all the questions I got right. That was a common occurrence. Sometimes I felt like such a failure and was so discouraged by imperfection that I stopped trying if something wasn't perfect. Has something like this ever happened to you? Have you ever given up just because something wasn't perfect? I'm sure you could remember a time in your youth when you struggled and something wasn't perfect. Perfectionism is a learned and reinforced thinking behavior pattern. The feelings you had towards perfectionism in your youth tend to shape who you are today. One model suggests perfectionism develops when children observe and imitate their parents' perfectionistic attitudes and behaviors. Your family, your community, and your schooling can have a big effect on how you see perfectionism. Understanding the source of your attitude about perfectionism can help you immensely when it comes to managing your own perfectionism. So in this lesson, I'll guide you through a few ways to identify how and why perfectionism developed in your life and how it still affects you. First, I want you to look into yourself and notice how perfectionism manifests in your expectations and ideals. An expectation is your belief that something will happen in the future. Do you, for example, set very high expectations for yourself and others? What happens if those expectations aren't met? An ideal is your concept of perfection. When you're working on a project, do you set an ideal that must be perfect? What if something happens that isn't perfect? Now, think about how you perceive your career goals in relation to expectations and ideals. Do you set realistic goals for yourself, or do you set overly ambitious goals? Do you feel like a failure when you don't meet your goals or see unmet goals as an opportunity? Do you overlook things that you've done well? Do you overlook the positive feedback and only focus on criticism? Now you have an idea of the way you relate to perfection. Think about how it may have developed this way. Think back to the first time when something didn't go perfectly. How did you feel? Did you let down your parents? Did you let down yourself? Did you feel a sense of doubt? Did you criticize? Were you criticized by others? Did this mistake play over and over in your mind? Were you focused on fixing it right? Take a breath. This is a deep dive into patterns that developed in your life. Unpacking these memories are key to understanding your current behaviors and attitudes towards perfectionism. Perfectionism is multidimensional and can morph over the years as you grow and change. For example, maybe when you were a kid, you didn't have ideals of your appearance. But as you've gotten older, you might feel like you have to look or act a certain way to come across as professional. That's a form of perfectionism. So I really encourage you to continually check with yourself. Recognize how the sense of perfectionism is changing over time. Start journaling this week. Note how and where perfectionism is showing up in your life. This way, you can better understand your relationship with perfectionism and start to challenge perfectionistic tendencies that undermine you. Distinguishing healthy perfectionism versus unhealthy perfectionism centers on whether your perfectionism is related to your strivings versus concerns. Are you striving for progress or straight up perfection? This lesson will provide tips for you how to detangle the pitfalls of unhealthy perfectionism. In 1978, Don Hammock described two types of perfectionism: neurotic perfectionism, which centers on negative and unhealthy attributes, and normal perfectionism, which focuses on potential of positivity and healthy attributes of perfectionism. Let's unpack the unhealthy perfectionism. In unhealthy perfectionism, negative habits and behaviors are driven by maladaptive thoughts and emotions about not meeting one's personal standards, the standards of others, and over-focusing on one's mistakes, self-doubt, and difference between high-level expectations and actually the level of achievement. Historically, the idea of perfectionism has centered on negative features of perfectionism. These individuals are at greater risk for anxiety, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, eating disorders, and incessant negative thoughts and concerns. An individual can be locked in to negative self-talk and self-ridicule. Does this sound like something you struggle with? Do you doubt yourself? Do these things never seem good enough? Maybe you relate to experiencing greater mental health challenges related to perfectionism. Some features of perfectionism can be considered positive. Healthy perfectionism, described as high-level striving and low-level concern, is striving to one's highest level with little to no attachment to the outcome. Healthy perfectionism allows for your mistakes and disparity between expectation and the actual level of achievement. Here's how you can tell if you are nurturing the healthy aspects of perfectionism. You are detached from the outcome. You can release criticism related to mistakes and actions. You have the ability to have a healthy response to others' expectations and your self-expectations. You can quiet the mind and control the negative self-talk. And you understand the difference between the imagined perfect and the reality of one's actual achievements. But this is a fine line. According to many researchers, distinguishing the healthy perfectionism versus unhealthy perfectionism centers on whether your perfectionism is related to your striving versus concerns. If you aren't enjoying it, then it's probably not healthy. So I want you to determine what parts of your life you're striving for healthy versus unhealthy perfectionism. Do you experience any mental, physical, and emotional conditions related to perfectionism? What have you done in the past that addresses your difficulties and challenges with unhealthy perfectionism? If you struggle, I urge you to reach to a friend or a trained professional for mental and emotional support, especially if you struggle with unhealthy perfectionism that causes you depression, anxiety, or symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Healthy perfectionism? Is there such a thing? Yes, if you've mastered equal balance of striving and non-attachment to the outcomes. So what does healthy striving look like? Are you thinking to yourself, how can I strive to my highest potential and let go of the final goal? Does this seem impossible to you? It is a fine line, but it's not impossible. Let's explore how you can build more healthy striving in your life and career. First, you need to feel free to make mistakes. Yes, freedom to make mistakes. Healthy striving allows you to strive to your highest level and create space for the natural process for your goal to become a reality. I was once sitting across from my mentor and late friend, Sam Christensen, and I confessed to him how I struggled whenever I taught or lectured. I felt like I had to have all the answers. This was something that was instilled in me when I was in graduate school. I was scarred by the Socratic method. I had this idea that I had to have everything perfect and have perfect command on a subject when I was speaking. I told him that I would spend hours reading and rehearsing and tattooing the information on my brain. And he simply said to me, I would be worried if you weren't a little nervous. It shows that you care. And he went on to say, no one expects you to be perfect. In fact, I dare you to add a little humor to your talks. You're pretty funny. Adding humor is a great way to lighten up perfectionistic tendencies. It can release the tension and help you not take yourself too seriously. Allowing humor in can help you work through any sort of perfectionistic ideals and soften the self-critical ideas. Next, I asked, how do you address all the questions even if you don't know the answers? He said, I let it come to me, as it does. Sometimes I don't even know what I'm going to say and what comes out of my mouth, but somehow the answer does. Or on another day with a different person, the answer will be different. That is being in the process, in the present moment. That's when it clicked with me. I realized I can prepare and work to my highest level and surrender to the outcomes and be in the present moment. Live in the process, live in the moment, and welcome in the space for exploration, inquiry, and not knowing. The cornerstone of healthy perfectionism is an attitude of striving for your best, but with a balanced and realistic outlook regarding to the outcome. Recognizing your goals of excellence and perfectionism is internally generated, not externally imposed. Now, I urge you to take a moment and identify a list of items that you consider healthy striving for yourself. And what are you releasing about the outcome? Focusing on doing your best without undue attachment to the outcome will have positive implications for your mindset that you live and stay in the present moment, a critical step in overcoming perfectionism. This one time when I was in graduate school, I was presenting new research in a lecture and I was flooded with anxiety. I was so nervous, my voice was shaking, and I literally forgot what I planned to say. I was scrambling to get through my first few slides. My palms were sweating, my voice was cracking, and my heart was racing. Has this ever happened to you? It's completely normal. It's likely that you're experiencing common waves of perfection paralysis. Perfection is a state or object that is without defect or flawless, while paralysis is the loss of the ability to move, think, or take an action in the body or mind. When these two combine, it could feel like a disaster. But it's not a disaster. It's totally normal. And the only way out is through. So in this lesson, I want to help you learn to diagnose when perfection paralysis is setting in. At its most basic core, perfection paralysis occurs when a person is frozen and cannot get a task started or completed. The main drivers are fear and anxiety. Science shows that fear can last up to 45 minutes and cause paralysis, and anxiety can last up to 24 hours. Anxiety leads to stress and the mind-body and manifests in many ways. So look at your physical response. Have you ever experienced heaviness in the chest, sweating palms, and difficulty breathing? Have you ever felt frozen on the spot? How about your mental and emotional response? Have you cycled through thoughts and feelings of being overwhelmed, defeated, unattached, ashamed, and sad? Have you ever had a sense of overwhelming pressure that left you no room for any error or mistake? Do you anticipate fear or imagine the worst case scenario? Do you feel that you are not living your highest abilities? Or do you feel that you are running behind? These are all common experiences of perfection paralysis. And when you can identify yourself, that's when you start to address them and make a plan to move past paralysis. In my case, that time when I was in graduate school and I blanked during a presentation, I was completely embarrassed and filled with guilt. After my talk, I had a mentor come to me and say, "That was powerful research, but I noticed how nervous you were in the beginning of the presentation." He recommended that I memorize the first few slides like the back of my hand. This would help me step right into the presentation and manage the fear and paralysis. So I want you to think of a recent time when you experienced perfection paralysis. It can be a big moment like giving a presentation or a small one like drawing a blank in a weekly meeting. What emotions came up for you? What were the physical sensations that showed up in your body? Perfection paralysis is a common experience, and identifying what it looks like for you is the first step in managing it. Have you ever been stuck in a moment, paralyzed by your need for perfection, and unable to process your current surroundings and emotions and thoughts? Like going to start a project, but your mind is on blank, then you become flooded with fear and anxiety? This is a part of the perfection paralysis cycle. In perfection paralysis, your pursuit of perfection leads you through the emotions of fear, guilt, and shame, which can make you feel overwhelmed and cause you to physically and mentally freeze. This freeze mode is probably familiar, where your emotional brain hijacks your mind, flooding you full of anxiety and causing you stress. While it may seem like perfection paralysis just affects your ability to get tasks done, it can actually start to affect your whole life and cause you to miss out on sharing the good creativity, your natural gifts, and most of all, you. So I want to help you grasp your neurobiology. I want you to recognize your own freeze cycle and have the method for identifying your triggers. Let's start with neurobiology. Evolutionarily, anxiety and fear are adaptive emotions. They develop to save your life. Think for a moment about being in the wild with a black bear. Fear is an adaptive response. Its function for you is to remain safe from danger and help you survive. The well-established response for fear and anxiety are fight, flight, freeze, and flop. Fight is when you respond to the situation head-on with your instinctive fight mechanism and is the most adaptive response. Flight is when you flee the situation to avoid the perceived danger or harm and get the heck out of there. And the freeze and flop automatic responses leave you frozen in your tracks. So take a moment here and think back to your most recent experience with anxiety. What mode do you automatically go into? Is it fight, flight, freeze, or flop? If your common mode is freeze or flop, you can fall into the paralysis cycle. In your day-to-day life, you're not in the wild, and the triggers of fear and anxiety tend to not be life or death, but you can build the pattern of freeze response from the flurry of emails, a comment in a meeting, gossip at the water cooler, or all the work that has piled up on your desk. It may not be a bear, but it's still stressful and anxiety-provoking. According to the Gallup World Poll, close to 57% of people experience stress are frozen by it, and 83% of Americans report work-related stress in the Everest College third annual work stress survey. The culprit is your emotional brain. The emotional brain is the primal brain processing information and drives you into the paralysis of fear and anxiety. We all have an emotional brain, even the most pragmatic people. When you're in your emotional brain, you're responding with the limbic cortex. You're unable to access your higher order critical thinking brain, which is processed by your frontal cortex. Specifically, scientists have recently found that fear and anxiety activate the same pathway. When this pathway is in full swing, this causes you to freeze. All of this to say, take a moment and identify the situations when you were stuck in the freeze cycle. Work backwards. What are the triggers that caused you to freeze? I encourage you to start journaling weekly and note the triggers in your daily life that cause you to freeze. Note the pattern and the story you tell yourself. This way you can better understand the conditioning relation to your freeze response and the triggers activating paralysis. Identifying your triggers of the freeze cycle is the first step in managing it. Do you have trouble getting started on a project or have challenges completing projects in a timely manner? If so, you may be struggling with perfection paralysis. Perfection paralysis doesn't present in a single way. It can manifest in different ways in you than your coworkers, family, and friends. There's no one size fits all, since you have your very own conditioning and patterns that have built to make you who you are. But there are known signs to tip you off when you may be experiencing perfection paralysis. Here are some common signs and pitfalls to avoid. The first common signs of perfection paralysis is the inability to start a project. Do you experience overwhelm where you can't even begin on a project or assignment? Do you have dread thinking of all the things you need to do, where it stops you in your tracks and you can't even start? Another common sign are the challenges to completion. Do you miss deadlines and important dates because you are filled with stress? Then there are the feelings of severe self-doubt and overwhelm. Have you been in a meeting and didn't want to speak up because you were afraid of looking incompetent? Or perhaps you've been given a new assignment and made you feel overwhelmed or helpless. Have you been afraid to ask for help? Do you feel ashamed not being able to figure things out on your own? Another common sign is having unrealistic expectations. Do you struggle with high perception and low self-esteem relating to perfectionistic strivings? Is your imagined version of perfection constantly unattainable? Perfection paralysis can also be evident in your relationships. Do your perfectionistic qualities tend to interfere with your relationships like team building or day-to-day interactions with your colleagues? Do you experience emotional outbursts related to stress? Finally, I want you to think about what you do when you're stressed. Stress is intrinsically linked to the perfection cycle and can interfere with every aspect of your life. By the way, the signs can change from day to day, moment to moment, as you mature. So, I recommend jotting down a list when you experience these signs and update your list over time. I'd also like to commend you. You're super brave to explore and deconstruct your perfection paralysis behaviors. Being able to understand your own behavior patterns will help you better unpack the experience and manage your perfection paralysis. Freezing is actually a normal response where your mind and body responds at a primal level. When you're swept up by the instinctual emotional brain, your sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive and you are overpowered with stress, anxiety, and fear. This causes you to freeze. How can you combat freezing when you're in it? In this lesson, I want to give you a few simple techniques to safely unfreeze yourself while you're in the perfection paralysis cycle. Science shows the first thing you can do is breathe. 3 deep breaths can reset your nervous system by activating your vagus nerve. This in turn puts on your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest. Think of breath as a physiological neurohack to soothe your nervous system. So let's take a moment right now and collectively take 3 deep breaths and practice. In for 1, 2, 3. Out. 1, 2, 3. In. 1, 2, 3. Out. 1, 2, 3. And in. 1, 2, 3. And out. 1, 2, 3. Do you notice a feeling of more calm? Counting the breath not only allows you to have more oxygen circulating through your body and nervous system, it also focuses your mind to recenter your attention on the present moment. Another way to unfreeze is to focus on the present moment and take in your surroundings with your 5 senses. This activates your sensory cortex to move out of the frozen state. For example, you can tune into the sounds of your environment through listening. You can visually scan the environment and focus on the colors of the objects, like a green plant or a brown leather chair. You can notice the feeling of your hands and touching your keyboard as you type, Or you can taste or smell something in your environment, which recenters you into the present moment and unfreeze and recognize you are not in immediate danger. Finally, you can come into compassion for yourself and your state of freezing. You could say, freezing is like this. I'm in freeze mode. And noting that you are in freeze mode helps you move through it. Scientifically, naming and noting your experience allows you to have the experience move through you, where you're a wise observer of what you're processing and experiencing. And when you open to the possibility where mistakes are welcomed into the equation, fear and anxieties lessen. Understanding that these experiences are a normal part of life and that no experience lasts forever, your frozen self will thaw, coming into greater presence and self-confidence. As a simple next step, work deep breathing into your daily routine and activate more calm states. And notice how you can practice mindfully taking in your environment and unfreeze your mind. So, you identify as a perfectionist? You're not alone. I too struggle with perfectionism from time to time. The important thing is perfectionism doesn't just have an on and off switch. It sometimes shows up. And when it does, you need a way to go through it so it doesn't get the best of you. Perfectionism doesn't need to be full of doom and gloom. You can learn how to better manage your perfectionism with a few mindful practices. Scientifically, studies show that you have the ability to rewire your mind through the process of neuroplasticity. Through training your brain and practice, you can guide your mind to more neutral states. Here are some best practices for supporting yourself when your inner perfectionist arrives. You can have the power to squash that little troublemaker. One thing you can do for yourself is to set realistic expectations. What do I mean about realistic expectations? That's highly individual to you. For me, being a writer, I find that setting goals related to my actual writing patterns is more realistic than setting a big goal that would keep me up all night. For example, when I write something, I outline and journal and let it sit for a few days. I also know that when I sit down at my desk, I can write between 500 to 3,000 words a day. So I don't set an expectation that I'll write 5,000 words in a single day. Instead, I set a realistic expectation. And even then, I start small. So if I write a single good sentence when I was aiming for 2,000 words, I'll still celebrate that I wrote a decent sentence. So it's important for you, when you're setting your goal for yourself, you're realistic and you know what is possible for you. Dream big and allow yourself to enjoy the process and take it day by day. The other thing you can do for yourself is to identify the stories and emotions and patterns that you fall into when your perfectionistic tendencies creep up. Studies show that when we name and label the experience we are having, we can better ride the wave of the emotion that's contributing to our suffering or stress. For me, I notice I get very rigid in my thinking as I get stressed. This is exactly in opposition, and the rigid thinking actually fuels perfectionism even further. So, I work on ways to de-stress, like taking a walk, moving my body, slowing down, and reaching to a friend to share my experience and emotions. This helps me break my perfectionistic thinking. I want you to create safety and nurture yourself when you feel perfectionism arises. Find out what works for you. Here are some methods you could try out. Meditate to recenter your mind. Give yourself a safety net to fail. It's more than okay to make mistakes and learn from mistakes and move on. Offer yourself compassion when you struggle with perfectionism. You don't need to chastise yourself for not being perfect. Train yourself to engage in positive imagination outcomes. Positive imagination conquers fear. And remind yourself, done is better than perfect. I recommend you test out some ways to support yourself to overcome perfectionism. Then write down your resources, like taking a walk in nature, calling a friend, or doing a meditation. When you have ways to help yourself work through these tendencies, you'll come to realize that these are only thoughts, and thoughts are impermanent. You have the power to rewire your mind for positive mind states. You got this. Would you believe me if I were to tell you that no one expects you to be perfect? And would you believe me if I told you when you're sharing information that people tend to find you more approachable and more likable if you make a few mistakes? Study after study shows that imperfection is a cultural norm and, in fact, is a likable characteristic. In a study in the 1980s, a research group had a professor give a lecture to 3 classes to test how the students learned best, and to specifically test whether they thought the professor was approachable, knowledgeable, and whether the students enjoyed learning from the professor. They divided the students into 3 groups and rated the professor's approachability, expertise, and level of entertainment. In the first lecture, the professor gave a perfect lecture without any mistakes, and the students rated him. The students reported the professor was stiff and unapproachable. He demonstrated wide expertise and was highly knowledgeable, but they found him hard to relate to, and they found learning was less entertaining. In the second lecture, the same professor made a few mistakes, showed a bit of humility and humor, and made the entire class laugh. The students rated the professor more approachable, more relatable, and more human when there were a few mistakes, and they still trusted his knowledge and expertise. And because they all laughed together, they found the class to be more entertaining. In the third lecture, the professor made many mistakes, and the students rated the professor as approachable and incompetent. They reported that the number of mistakes interfered with their learning, and they couldn't trust the information. The famous study highlights how there is a healthy balance between perfectionism and making mistakes. Giving a perfect lecture wasn't the most enjoyable for the students. In fact, students enjoyed a lecture where the professor made a few mistakes and was humbled to seem more human. This made the professor more likable and accessible. So what are things you could do in your present role that can allow for more imperfections along the way? Of course, preparation is important, and you don't want to make too many mistakes, but allowing yourself space to make mistakes and learn along the way will help you and your team members and your community. They will appreciate you for being imperfect. Let your confidence in your vulnerability inspire others and spur your self-growth. That's much better than being perfect anyway. It's proven. Nurture outshines nature. When you nurture positive mind states and positive thinking, you can reduce your challenges related to perfectionism. You can actually rewire your mind for positive circuitry. So in this lesson, I want to offer you a few helpful strategies to nurture yourself and find more positive ways to manage perfectionism. First, always try to do your best, given what you have. The most nurturing words for my mother growing up was, "Did you try your best?" Keep this question at the front and center. Ask yourself, did you try your best? If the answer is yes, then you did try your best and you should move on. Really, move on and let go. Let go of the self-critical thoughts. Trying your best is all that you can do. If you think you didn't try your best, and you can point to a realistic expectation like you didn't start a project soon enough, or you just didn't feel like giving it your all, then chalk it up to a learning moment. And by the way, when you dig into the why you didn't do your best, you'll probably find out there was a reason. You were busy, sad, overwhelmed, or let your reason be good enough. Next, detach yourself from the concerns of the outcomes as best you can. You can absolutely benefit from positive aspects of striving for perfection, but I want you to detach yourself from the concerns about the actual outcome. For example, if you set out to get a promotion, but they ended up promoting someone else, don't look at yourself as a failure. Did you try your best? Yes. Did it just not work out this time? Yes. You're still a great employee and good at your job, so let the concerns go. It's also imperative to have a good social connections and compassionate support system. This is critical in reducing your struggles with perfectionism. In a recent study conducted by researchers at Yale University's, scientists report that social relationships can mitigate negative experiences and trauma. The study looked at individuals that experience post-traumatic stress disorder. Scientists found specifically nurturing relationships is healing and can reduce the trauma experienced. Building pro-social relationships can reduce the negative experience of perfectionism. These positive relationships can allow you to have the ability to rewire your mind for positive outcomes. So I want you to identify a support network that can help you. Do you have a friend or a colleague who can offer you a nurturing and healthy relationship? Finally, I want you to seek out joy. I learned this lesson from my wise friend and mentor, Sam Christensen. He saw me struggling with my devils of imperfection, and he told me to orbit my thoughts around one simple question. Was that fun? Every time I responded yes, 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 I did have fun because it required my full attention, full presence of myself. I was in the process, and it was fun. Humans are social creatures. We share ourselves, as frightened as it seems, with all of our fears and dreams. But we are gifts to one another. It's how we've been wired to survive as a species. So even if you strive for perfection, I want you to nurture yourself to a place of understanding and positivity and growth. First, ask yourself, did I try my best? And write about the positive aspects of trying your best. Second, detach from the outcome and let it be, as Paul McCartney would say. Third, identify people who support and nurture you. And finally, have fun. Ask yourself, am I having fun? I guarantee when you ask yourself this, you'll find more ways to have fun along the way. So we've reached the end of this course, but it's not the end of your journey. The truth is, this is the beginning of your journey, and working through overcoming perfectionism may be difficult, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. I want to provide you with some resources that'll help you on your journey. First, I recommend looking into my book, Insight into a Bright Mind. In my book, I share a detailed review of the most proactive research in overcoming perfectionism and offer exercises for you to mindfully and compassionately step into your power. The American Psychological Association has a great article on the many faces of perfectionism. The Harvard Business Review has an article on managing perfectionism. If you're looking for additional support, you can always talk to a trusted friend, colleague, or a family member about your struggles with perfectionism. You don't have to suffer in silence. Asking for support is empowering. Freeing yourself from social isolation and connecting with others helps mitigate the challenges with perfectionism. Lastly, if you have a complex situation or just need some support, definitely consider working with a psychologist. Some psychologists may even offer pro bono services for those in need. I recommend using the website betterhelp.com to find your best match. And stay in touch. I would love to hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn, visit my website at NicoleTatro.com, or find me on Twitter or Instagram at AwesomeNeuro. Thanks for watching, and I wish you the best as you reach your dreams by focusing on your goals with healthy striving. By taking time to watch this course and invest in yourself, you're well on your way to cultivating more positive mind states. Remember, let go of attachments to the outcome and enjoy the flow.